Continuing with the European Social Survey, generally for nominal and ordinal variables, although with some exceptions, the first piece of summary output you can produce is a frequency table. To produce a frequency table, first of all go up here to Analyze, then Descriptive Statistics, and Frequencies. And what you will find with a lot of these windows in SPSS is that although they can look more complex, they work on essentially the same principle. You will have a window over here listing all of the variables in your data set, and you will have a window or set of windows over here in which to transfer those variables. So a lot of the procedures that we do using the menu system in SPSS involve us selecting variables on the left hand side and transferring them to the appropriate location on the right hand side. For frequency tables, this is one of the more straightforward because there's only one window on the right hand side. So whatever variables we select over here on the left and transfer over either by double clicking or by clicking the arrow in the middle, once we click OK, SPSS will produce frequency tables for whatever variables we have over here in this box on the right hand side. So I'm going to select three variables. I'm going to select level of interest in politics, transfer that over. I'm going to select level of trust in a country's parliament. Again, you can double click this one or you can click on the variable name to transfer it over. And then for the last one, I'm going to show you another way to browse the data set. So quite often you will be searching for your variables either by their label, which you see here first, or by the variable name, which you see in brackets, in square brackets here. You can also get it by default by right-clicking in the field here to display variable names, in which case it will just display the variable names. If you know the name of the variable or the location of the variable, the order of these variables by default corresponds to their order in the list in variable view. But also if you know the starting letter of a variable, you can simply type E on your keyboard if it's an education variable, and by repeatedly pressing E or the relevant letter, it will simply cycle you through every variable in the dataset that begins with the letter E. You can also cycle them in different ways. You can sort them alphabetically, you can sort them by file order, which is the default order here in which they appear in variable view, or you can sort them by measurement level, so it'll start by displaying all the scale variables at the very bottom, ordinal variables in the middle, and then nominal variables here at the top. So by default we can leave it on sort by variable labels, and if we scroll up here we can transfer one more variable, which is attitudes towards emigration, over here to the right hand side. So you'll see here that by default it gives us the variable label, but it also gives us the variable name in square brackets, which is this shorter name here. Now, as with any of these windows in SPSS, you will typically have a set of additional options over here on the right hand side. Some of these are more useful than others for the moment, and some of these will be quite important as we get into more complicated procedures later on. If we click in the statistics window, we see that it allows us to return different percentiles, so we can get it to quartiles, the 25th and 50th and 75th. We can specify cutoffs, or we can specify individual percentiles. If we are including a different variable type, so I'll talk about this later on in the course, but quite often what we can do here is we can transfer variables that strictly speaking are ordinal variables like attitudinal variables, but we can treat as scale variables. So these would be attitudinal measures that measure on a 0 to 10 scale, let's say. Often what we'll do with those is we will take the mean value of those. But indeed for scale variables in general, you can also get it, you can use this window to return mean, median, mode and sum. You get it to measure dispersion, typically the standard deviation, and you can get it to return some summaries of the properties of the distribution as well. I'm going to leave this one blank for the moment, but just to show you that it's there, and this is typically what you will get in many of the basic windows in SPSS, is an option for it to return more detailed figures in the output viewer. We can also get it to return charts. So by default in frequencies it offers us the most basic chart types. We can get it to return a bar chart, a histogram, and if we click bar charts you'll see that it also gives us the option to return frequencies or percentages. If you do ask it for a bar chart, you always want to make sure that you're clicking percentages over here. Particularly with the data set like this, reporting it in percentages is what will allow us to compare across countries and between and across data sets, and also between data set waves within the same country. Once you've made your settings, click continue, and then finally you'll see there's a couple of different options down here. We're not going to worry about those for the moment, but typically just be aware that in any future procedures we cover, there will often be additional setting windows over here that we might need to click into and mess around with. Once I've got my variables set up in this box over here, once I've got my settings in place, I can then click OK, and the third window will open, which is the output viewer. So any procedures that we perform in previous screens, the output will appear in this dedicated window over here called the output viewer. And again, if you want, this file can be saved as well for reopening later on. So in the frequencies table, we see that we get a couple of pieces of information. First of all, for each of the variables that we've selected, we have a valid case count and a missing case count. So for each of these variables, let's take this one, level of interest in politics. We've got 2,212 valid cases, so that's responses that were not coded as missing, and we have 4 that were coded as missing. For trust in the country's parliament, we have 89 missing cases, and for this question here, we've got 35 missing cases. And you do want to keep an eye on this as well to make sure that the missing case count is not too high. The frequency tables are then reported in sequence for each of these variables. So our level of interest in politics, we have here, first of all the different answer categories running down here as row headers, and we have 4 columns running from left to right: frequency, percent, valid percent, and cumulative percent. I'll explain each of those in turn in a moment. As we move down, you'll see that we also have the table for the second variable and the table for the third variable, and at the very bottom we've also got our bar charts with our percentage on the y-axis and our answer categories on the x-axis. So we can quickly get an overview of the distribution. Now, as to the different pieces, or as to the information in each of these different cells, in SPSS, frequency refers to the number of people who answered in that particular answer category. So for this question, how interested are you in politics? 358 respondents said they were very interested. 533 said they were hardly interested. We have in the missing categories, we've got 1 refusal, 3 who recorded don't know, which gives us a total of 4. So out of the total questions, including missing, we've got 2216 cases and 2212 valid answers. The percentage then in this column is the percentage of all cases, including missing cases. So 16.2% of the total 2216 recorded they were very interested. You want to be careful with this because you always want to make sure that you're reporting the valid percentage. The valid percentage is the column that is adjusted for missing cases. So in this case, it's 16.2% of the valid total, this total here excluding missing cases. So when you're reporting this, we would report this as 38.7%. If you want to round it, that's fine. 39% said they were quite interested, 24% hardly interested, and 16% very interested. So for questions like this, with a low proportion of missing cases, the difference between percent and valid percent is often quite small. But if there are a high number of missing cases, then quite quickly you'll see there's quite a difference between this percent and valid percent. So for the moment, follow the simple rule of always reporting the valid percent, which is adjusted for missing cases. Cumulative percent, we'll just scroll down to this question here to explain this. Cumulative percentages are simply the sum of all preceding valid percentages. So if we look down here at this question, we see it measures the respondents' level of trust in the country's parliament. They have 11 options, 0 no trust at all, 10 complete trust, and they can indicate their level of trust with all of these different levels here using the numbers 1 to 9. Now, if we see here in the cumulative percentage column, if we wanted to report this, we could say that 8.7% say no trust, 5.5% say a level of trust of 1, and so on. But if we wanted to say report the percentage of respondents who have a level of at least 4, so that's 4 and under, we would say that the percentage of respondents with a level of trust at 4 and under is 42.4. So this figure 42.4 is the sum of these preceding valid percentages here. So 10.7 plus 7 plus 5.5 plus 8.7. What percentage of respondents had a level of trust of 7 or less? It's 88.3%. And what percentage of respondents had a level of trust of 9 or less? 98.1%. So the cumulative percentage is simply the sum of the preceding valid percentages for the preceding answer categories.